I'm so fortunate to have my friend John Kim up now. John, I'm going to lead us in with a quote. It's from the World Economic Forum, and it says, DAOs are changing the way we think about how organizations work. And so, John, throughout the day, we've been talking about everything from blockchain, Web3, NFTs, crypto, metaverse. Again, we had Philip Rosedale, as I call him, Metaverse OG. Now we've got something new that's on the horizon called DAOs, Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. John, this is what is the word? Your wheelhouse. This is your wheelhouse. And I want you to just take a few minutes to talk a little bit about yourself, but let's start with what are DAOs, and then we'll start the conversation from there. So again, John, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I'm with you. I actually was a part of Second Life back in the day as well. So had definitely a fanboy moment seeing Philip present about the metaverse. And it's something where a lot of times now, um, as people are diving into the metaverse, have all these different questions, I often think back and I'm reminded of the different experiences that I myself had in Second Life. I used to be a DJ in Second Life for a real life nightclub in the UK,
What?
and people would often tip me. They would actually stream some of my sets at that club, even though I was spinning in the Second Life virtual world. And people who would tip me in Second Life would actually tip me sometime in the
Big.
Linden dollars, which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
kind of like the
yeah.
equivalent of a lot of the cryptocurrencies that we see now, but also with digital assets that they had created.
Yep.
Which is the equivalent now of NFTs. And so there's a lot that I think Second Life broke ground maybe a little early for here in the metaverse that we're living in, or at least seeing now.
Yep.
So really cool to see Philip. Really great to hear all the different speakers today who were sharing. And like you said, there's so much that's interconnected here in the conversation around what Web3 is, what it incorporates, what it entails. I want to actually start by using a tagline that I've kind of picked up recently. I was actually just at ETH Denver, which is a major Ethereum based conference. Ethereum is a layer one protocol or a blockchain that's quite popular, where a lot of these applications that we're talking about have been built on. And so the Ethereum conference in Denver, Colorado, brought together tens of thousands of builders and community members. Um, Obviously, we're very active in the space of the future of Ethereum and the future of blockchain and Web3. And one thing that I came to realize in all the different conversations, hearing about the really cool things that people were building in DeFi, in NFTs, with cryptocurrencies into the metaverse, et cetera, is that this Web3 space it starts with the blockchain technology, of course. Like that is the fundamental foundation and premise for everything that we're talking about here today. But it's being built with culture and through community. And that's really, those are the two central aspects of what the DAO concept is. So DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations. It's quite a mouthful. And there are a lot of kind of simplified ways of describing it. And I want to be conscious that, that we are speaking to the Wall Street Wizards audience. And so there are a lot of young entrepreneurs here who are thinking about the different companies, the different ideas that they want to build, et cetera. And so a lot of the DAO concepts that we've seen are more organizational, even more than they are businesses, in the sense that they're groups of people or even communities of people who are organized around shared values, have a centralized mission that they want to make decisions around collectively. They usually need to make decisions that relate to finances. And so there are fund management aspects as well. And these decisions are made, again, collectively through a predetermined, agreed upon set of rules that's actually built onto the website or onto the blockchain. And so there's a technical element to it, of course, here, where these rules then are built into smart contracts that are written into the blockchain. And at that point, those rules can only be changed if the collective majority of that community would vote to make those changes. And so basically to say that it's pretty hard to do that, and with good reason, because once you get into this community, into this organization, you really want to make sure that everyone is pretty dialed in and bought into those concepts, into those values. And so they operate in this bottom up approach, which is very different from a lot of what we see traditionally in governments, in a lot of big businesses, et cetera. Corporately, there's a top-down approach, which is very centralized. You have a small group of people who are making most of the major decisions for everyone else. And so oftentimes that can be pretty unfair. There's corruption, there's exploitation, there are a lot of just kind of messy things that can happen, because human beings are human beings, right? And so the DAOs actually allow for a lot of transparency. Again, going back to the blockchain, every decision, every transaction is actually written onto the blockchain. So it's easy for everyone to see what's going on, what's happening. And that then engenders trust. It allows for people then to, regardless of who they are, where they live, and how they're participating, it allows them to then be conscious actors and participants in a way that everything that they do really then is reflected like in the ways that they're voting that are then recorded, the proposals that they're submitting, again, that other people are able to see, where that's coming from, et cetera. I don't know how much you want to go into like the actual DAO mechanics. There's a lot more to touch on here. I think I'll finish up, I guess, like this first segment by saying that there are kind of three, maybe four fundamental elements to a DAO. So there is a governance model. There's a set of rules, again, that this group or this community or this organization has agreed upon that basically says these are the things that we're trying to do. These are the types of, or the mission that we have here and the rules that we want to abide by. There will be a DAO treasury. So typically there are going to be some funds that need to be managed. And so that has different technical mechanisms. You might hear terms such like a multi-sig, which basically means that there are different people who then need to ensure the credibility and the validity of how those funds are being managed. Although oftentimes those transactions actually can be automated through the smart contracts that control the DAO. And then there are tools. So there's a lot of voting that goes on. That DAO treasury often incorporates tokens, which are the voting mechanism, so that there is an equality and an equity to how the participants, the community members, are able to decide on how different decisions are made. And that's through the use of these tokens. And finally, they're the people themselves. And I think that's the part that is probably the most important to me in the concept of a DAO, again, because it really introduces and helps to facilitate concepts of ownership, of equality and equity, and fosters new ways of collaboration that are hard to facilitate right now in more traditional constructs. So there's a lot to cover. So hopefully that wasn't too long, but
No.
yeah.
And let me tell you, without even looking at my questions, I already know that there are people out there saying, okay, this is a new way of building an organization. How do I do it? Because if I'm correct, you either have started a DAO or you're starting one, if I'm correct. So I know I'm asking a question probably people out here want to know. How do I get started? And do I need a lawyer to do this? And if I do need a lawyer, how much does it cost?
Yeah, so there's some very granular questions there that I think that there are a lot of tools out there. There are a lot of platforms that I might direct people to. I guess I'll start take a step back and say that I have founded a couple DAOs now, and I'm a member of a few as well. Um, and I kind of wanted to touch on some of the use cases, I think, to kind of highlight like what people have been doing in DAOs. But I think to answer, I guess, like your question, there are quite a few tools out there that can to help you start the DAO in terms of some of the smart contracts that are required to start constructing the governance models or the rules, as well as the treasury and the tokenomics, which dictate some of the governance protocols, the voting protocols, et cetera. I would highly advise going to an attorney. The ways that DAOs are structured right now, there is a lot of question around the legality of ownership of various assets and how those assets are treated. There are questions around how even the tokens themselves can be treated based on where you live. And so different countries, because DAOs do tend to be global, as much of Web3 is, it is something that you probably want to consult with an attorney. There are a lot of different use cases, and like I said, a lot of different tools and platforms that will help you to provide some guidance there. Again, this is something where when I say you, hopefully that's a collective you. This is not something you should do alone.
Right.
You definitely want to do it with a team, with a group, of people who again, are moving together in the same direction. And that's something where, this is all fairly new. This is a very nascent space. And so when we talk about the benefits of DAOs, which are, I think, vast and really exciting, there are also still a lot of question marks, things that need to be kind of figured out. And so a lot of us who are early adopters in the space are taking a little bit of a risk in the way that these DAOs are structured, because we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. A really good example, I think, is the first DAO was called the DAO, or the Genesis DAO, is created on the Ethereum blockchain, and they raised something like 150, maybe 170 million dollars for their DAO treasury. And unfortunately, there was an exploit that a hacker was able to find a vulnerability in one of the smart contracts, and they were able to siphon off somewhere between 50 to 70 million dollars. And so obviously, that DAO had to shut down. There have been other instances where, from a technological perspective, DAOs have been exploited. There have been other instances where, because the governance models themselves were poorly constructed or maybe incompletely constructed, didn't necessarily take into account all the different potential scenarios and contingencies, there were instances where there were bad actors, et cetera. And so it is something where I think as much time may need potentially to be spent like thinking through like the legal ramifications of different actions and how to incorporate and be constructed, et cetera. Even more thought needs to be, I think, put into like the governance model itself, and again, into just like the whole purpose, of why the DAO is being constructed in the first place.
John, I actually reached out to my lawyer. I think, as you knew, we just couldn't get him in at the right time because I actually had contacted my lawyer who actually does DAOs. I wanted him to give the legal perspective because I agree with you. I do think you need to have a lawyer involved, at least particularly at this stage, if that's something you want to do. I want to ask another question. In the headlines, we've seen recently a DAO group buy the U.S. Constitution or want to buy the U.S. Constitution. There's another group that wants to buy the Denver Broncos football team. And then there's another group that bought, for all the music lovers on the live stream. They bought Wu Tang Clan. Wu Tang Clan. Forgive me. I'm not good with the pronunciation, but they bought the Wu Tang Clan's latest unreleased album. I think it was for $4 million, something like that. A DAO group raised $4 million to give them the right to buy this album before it even went public. Can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit about maybe some other projects that you've heard about?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, there's so many different use cases for different groups and organizations that are uh, coordinating and building now. You had mentioned the Constitution DAO. They raised about $47 million in 1 week. And so
Yeah.
this speaks to a lot of the kind of unique qualities of a DAO as an organizational vehicle, because it would be very difficult, in most places to be able to bring together an organization and to even bring enough structure to be able to raise that much money. And of course, around something that for a lot of people, is kind of um, a pipe dream, and really a fantasy, of what are you going to do if you actually purchase the U.S. Constitution, and that DAO actually wanted to entrust the ownership of it to a nonprofit, and so it wasn't meant to just be an exercise in how much money can we raise very quickly and purchase something that didn't have any value. It was actually a cultural mission, and so it was a community of people who bought into that, who invested in that, but even beyond that, invested in the relationships with one another as well, which I think is incredibly important. A really fun one that I think some of the listeners might enjoy is the Pizza DAO. So the
Yeah.
Pizza DAO is a
Yeah.
DAO that came together. Thousands of pizza lovers around the world united. They launched a Rare Pizzas NFT project. So I know that you've covered some of the NFT topics earlier, and so they helped fund that project, in which in turn, some of the proceeds from that project, as well as some of the other token sales that they have done, have gone to starting pizza franchises. And so really making sure that the world has really great pizza chains everywhere. And so that's something that's near and dear to my own heart because I love food. And that also speaks into some of the utility of DAOs. There is a DAO called the Maker DAO. And so the Maker DAO is more of an infrastructure DAO that has created a stable coin called DAI.
Hmm.
And what that means is that it is a cryptocurrency that is pegged to the US dollar. And so there's a little more stability in terms of like the value of that actual token. That token, the DAI, can actually be used now in a lot of real world implementations. So again, I was at ETH Denver last week. At the conference, they had a lot of food trucks that were out there, and the food trucks were actually accepting the DAI
Oh,
as a
wow.
measure of transaction.
Okay.
And so there are a lot of really different, interesting use cases from gaming where you have DAOs that are meant for gamers to help fund the next game that they're interested in. And then to also then to be able to participate in some of the development of those games, and then also the tooling that allows for them to have leaderboards and different histories of the game assets that they also have in one game that might potentially in the future you'd be able to use in another game as well. And so there's both utility, there's a little bit of the fantasy and like the pizza DAO and the Constitution DAO, et cetera. Um, and I think in terms of like what some of the people here at the Wall Street Wizards might be interested in, there's a lot of DeFi. There's a lot of decentralized finance where you have automated market makers. You have different DAOs that are really meant to help shape what the future of decentralized finance might look like. And so there are rewards because the premises of these DAOs are really for a high level of engagement to be contributing and not just to be passive actors. And so this is something again where a lot of the DAO mechanics from the voting and the governance really incentivize people to be active participants, to invest in those relationships, to invest in education, to invest in really understanding the problems and the challenges that they're facing as a community, and then to be able to vote accordingly, which is very different, I think, from when you think about traditional voting systems where you have a lot of people who are voting just for the sake of voting, but may not have actually read through kind of proposals, et cetera. That's something that I probably should have talked more about as well, is that the community members, in addition to having the opportunity to vote on different decisions, have the opportunity to submit proposals. And the ways in which they vote on those proposals really are democratized so that different governance models have different ways of implementing voting structures, but typically it's going to be closer to a one vote per member, so that you can't buy X numbers of votes, or even interesting combinations of models where your vote may be weighted more based on the length of time that you've actually been with a DAO as a member, as an active member. And so there it's based kind of on longevity and the length of your commitment, because as a DAO member, you can also pretty easily exit the DAO. It's something where it's not meant for people to have a high barrier of entry. At the same time, they're not trying to lock you in there. They're looking for people who are committed, who are dedicated, to being a part of that community, to achieving that single cause, et cetera. And so getting into a DAO, typically the barriers of entry are going to be based on whether you can acquire some of the DAO tokens, which might mean just purchasing them, or in some cases earning your way into a DAO. And again, exiting for the most part really just means telling them that you want out, and then you can just divest yourself of your governance tokens or
So,
membership tokens.
so John, I gotta tell you, I find DAOs fascinating. And this is when we send out our survey to all the people that are listening in the live stream. One of the questions we're going to ask in the survey is, what are the topics that you want to hear more of? And I hope a lot of you all select DAOs because I find them fascinating myself. I'm actually looking at forming a group to do one. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you, since we both live in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's a lot of great pizza around here. To the listeners, what if there are other pizza lovers, John, like you and I? What if they want to get involved in the pizza DAO? Can they? Is it open to anyone, or is it not? And if it is, what's the cost to get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what the tokens cost right now, but it is something that I'm fairly certain you can buy your way into, either by acquiring one of the rare pizza NFTs, or by purchasing some of the tokens for membership into the DAO. I have not kept up with the Pizza DAO outside of just participating in some of the events. I do know that they do have one fun event every year, which is I think the anniversary of Bitcoin Pizza Day. So I think I saw a slide actually here. There's a gentleman who paid about 10,000 Bitcoin for a pizza in 2010.
Yeah.
At this point, those pizzas are probably worth a couple $1 billion. And so every year, the Pizza DAO has an event where they have a few select partnered pizzerias, and they basically just pay for pizzas for all. And so I think this is a lot of the fun that also comes from DAOs, which is that it is a community of people, right? They're human beings. It's not just the smart contract code that dictates the governance models, for how these DAOs are regulated. Um, but it's the people who are coming up with the different ideas for how they want to where they want to launch the next pizza DAO franchise. What kind of pizzas they want to offer. What size even those pizzas are going to be. Like the DAO members again, like are incentivized to and encouraged, highly encouraged to participate, to submit proposals, to vote. And I think this really opens up these new paradigms for how we communicate with one another. Again, this equality, this leveling of the playing field, where people can come in, without having millions of dollars, without having, a certain educational or professional background, et cetera, can come in, and this is something where I highly encourage, the youth from the Wall Street Wizards, to learn, to invest in the education. I think, there's incredible opportunity for this journey of education and discovery, to check out different DAOs, to read up on them, to go on Twitter, which is a great resource for all things crypto, and to find the people that you enjoy engaging with. There's so many people in Web3 who want to answer those questions, if
Hmm.
someone is willing to step up and ask them. And so I like to think that there are no really dumb questions in Web3 if you've done your research, because the answers are pretty out there, right? But if you haven't done the research and you're asking a question and it's very easy to find, then I think that's like where you've probably failed yourself. And so just finding these ways in which we can create new paradigms of how we collaborate, how we build, how we resource. So there are new financial models of investment, of crowdfunding, of sponsorship, of lending, and of course of human capital. There are interesting ways now where people are able to find jobs who can get hired within weeks of getting into this space, just because they've really committed themselves to passionately pursue, learning more about and finding how they can contribute, and bring their new perspectives, to bring their creativity. And this will help, I think, break down a lot of the barriers of entry that a lot of people might be feeling, and simplify, I think, how they get into community.
One of the things I've been doing is I've been trying to explain DAOs to people. I said it's actually one of the only places where your gender, your color, none of that matters. It's totally a place where there's complete individuality, where none of those things come into play.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've We've got a few questions that I want to run by you. I mean, this is an amazing topic. I love this topic. I hope we get to do it again. So one of the questions that came out was smart contracts. If you could talk a little bit about the smart contract aspect of DAOs and what that means.
So smart contracts, they are programming language code. And so they're not the same as legal contracts. And again, this is where you get into some of the potential downstream complexity of regulatory and ownership issues when it comes to DAOs. There are DAOs that can be incorporated um, as LLCs, and there are DAOs
Hmm.
that do not have, aren't tethered to a standard or traditional legal entity. And so the smart contracts, again, are more like rules around how people interact, and how people can be incentivized, how funds are dispersed, and what the voting mechanisms are, that basically govern those types of interactions. Um, and every one of those actions are transactions that are written to the blockchain. And so I think going into that distinction is really important to abstract away the contracts part of the smart contracts, and not have like a close association with the more traditional kind of understanding of what contracts are
So,
in a legal
John,
perspective.
as we close out, it was something I wish I'd done at the top. I just got so pumped and excited to talk about DAOs. I forgot. Let's talk about your company. Decentology and your background. I was so pumped, man. I just jumped right into DAO. So let's take the last couple of minutes and just talk about who you are and your company, and anything else you want to give in terms of advice or resources to our listeners.
Sure, absolutely. Always happy to shill. So Decentology, I think some of you may have already heard from some of our members here today on different panels. We are an early stage blockchain startup. We build developer tools with a mission of helping the next 10 million web developers onboard into Web3. In that process, we get to work with a lot of really great partners, a lot of really great communities. A lot of our core ethos is around equity in the Web3 space. And so we partner with different women's groups. Later today, we actually have a workshop that we're doing for the Black NFT arts community in person in Atlanta, Georgia, to help introduce artists into the opportunities that they may have in the digital space. We're all about community. So this conversation about DAOs is very relevant to us because we ourselves are actually transitioning into a hyperverse DAO, which is focused on developers, but also others who are looking to get into the Web3 space. If you're a product manager, if you're in marketing, if you're a designer, et cetera, there's a lot there that's available to you. And so, we definitely welcome you, to join our Discord, follow us on Twitter, go to our website at decentology.com. Beyond that, I am involved with a couple different DAOs that aren't developer related, but some that are more kind of social cause related, others that are NFT collection related. And again, I think there's just so much opportunity for people to dive into all these different areas that align with their own passions. And so I think be opportunistic about the things that you really care about. And sure, there's like money to be made in these spaces, but ultimately, I think the value is just in finding like purpose and fulfillment, finding authenticity and sincerity like in this digital space. And so the relationships that you build there are going to be the most valuable investment that you can make.
John, with that, I just want to say thank you. As I told you, I really appreciate just you coming on and spending time with us. And even in your bio, you talked about how important it is to do the work that we're trying to do with the Wall Street Wizards Academy. So thank you for giving us your time. Up next, we're going to be talking about Web3, everybody. Blockchain, Web3, foundation upon which everything we've pretty much been talking about today. So after this short break, take a break, come back, and it's going to be Web3 on the agenda. Thanks,
Thanks, Bill.
John.
Thanks. Appreciate the invitation.